The first whisper of dawn, a bruised purple bleeding into the gray Seattle sky, found Colton Drew already immersed in his world. At 35, Colton was less a sound engineer and more a sonic alchemist. His studio, Echo Chamber, was a sanctuary of acoustic precision, nestled in a renovated brick building on the fringes of Pioneer Square. The historic district, usually bustling with early commuters and the distant rumble of the light rail, was still in its pre-caffeine hush. Inside, Colton was already awake, a ritual of strong, black coffee in one hand and a glowing waveform on his monitor. He wasn't merely good at his job. He was legendary. His reputation preceded him, whispered in hushed tones among musicians, archivists, and eccentric collectors. If Colton Drew can't fix it, it can't be fixed. He had an almost supernatural ear, an uncanny ability to hear and manipulate frequencies that were invisible to others, to coax life back into recordings long thought dead. His meticulous nature bordered on obsession. Each crackle, each hiss, a challenge to be conquered, a puzzle to be solved. There wasn't a tape, no matter how degraded, that Colton couldn't digitize, restore, or, as some clients claimed, resurrect. He lived a quiet, almost monastic life, his days defined by the intricate dance of sound, the pursuit of auditory perfection. His apartment in the stately Queen and neighborhood was minimalist, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of his studio, a place where silence was a canvas, not an absence point too. The impossible tape, late morning, 10:30 a.m. The delivery arrived precisely at 10:30 a.m., a nondescript brown package hand-delivered by a courier Colton recognized. It was from Mr. Harrison, his most enigmatic and lucrative client. Mr. Harrison was a reclusive, old-money collector of obscure music and forgotten media, a man who paid exorbitant sums for Colton's unique talents. His usual requests involved rare jazz recordings from the 40s or experimental electronic music from the 70s, tapes often on the verge of disintegration, but never quite beyond Colton's reach. This package, however, felt different. He sliced open the tape, revealing a reel that looked less like a recording and more like archaeological artifact. The magnetic tape itself was visibly warped, flaking at the edges like ancient parchment, almost crumbling under the slightest touch. It was a miracle it hadn't completely disintegrated. Tucked inside was a terse note, typed on heavy cream-colored stationery. Colton, this one, it's beyond anything I've seen. A local band from decades ago, recorded in that old studio on Industrial Way. Name your price. Just give me what's on it. Harrison. Name your price. The phrase hung in the air, a testament to Harrison's desperation and the tape's impossible condition. Colton felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the thrill of the insurmountable challenge. This wasn't just a job, it was a test of his very essence. He carefully, painstakingly, set up his vintage Studer 80 reel-to-reel, a machine he had lovingly restored, knowing its delicate touch was essential for such a fragile medium. He then connected it to his state-of-the-art digital audio workstation, DAW, a complex array of screens and interfaces that would allow him to capture every last dying gasp of sound. The process of stabilizing the tape, gently cleaning it, and then digitizing it at the highest possible resolution would take hours, maybe days. He began, a surgeon at the operating table, his hands steady, his focus absolute .3. The first faint echoes, afternoon, 2 p.m. The first hour was pure concentration, a delicate dance between analog and digital. He managed to capture the initial few minutes of the recording. The music, a raw, unpolished garage rock sound, thrummed through his studio monitors. It was the kind of music that smelled of stale beer and youthful rebellion, a snapshot of a forgotten era in Seattle's underground scene. He started the initial cleanup, running denoising algorithms, try to smooth out the inevitable hiss and crackle of a tape this old. That's when he heard it, that a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like a breath against a microphone, buried deep beneath the fuzz of a distorted guitar riff. He paused the playback, rewound, and listened again. Nothing. He dismissed it as a phantom artifact, a trick of the ear, or perhaps just extreme tape degradation. He ran a more aggressive denoising pass. Hoping to erase it, he resumed playback. The whisper was still there, a ghost in the machine, stubbornly clinging to the audio. It was so subtle, so fleeting, that anyone else would have missed it entirely or written it off as background noise. But Colton's ears were tuned to the impossible. He frowned, leaning closer to the monitors, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was unsettling, like finding a single, misplaced pixel in a perfectly rendered image. He isolated the track, amplifying it, listening intently. It was just a whisper, indistinct, a mere wisp of sound. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the music, on the challenge of Restoration Point 4. Growing disturbances and unsettling cold. Evening, 7 p.m. As the afternoon bled into evening, Colton delved deeper into the mix. He was in the zone, hours melting away as he meticulously worked through the layers of sound. He isolated the vocal track, then the drums, then the bass, searching for the source of the anomaly. The whispers began to grow clearer, more distinct, no longer just a breath, but almost a syllable, a fleeting, unintelligible word. And then, amidst the raw energy of the band's final track, he heard it, a faint, distant scream, unmistakably human. It was buried, almost swallowed by the music, but it was there, a sharp, piercing sound that sent a jolt through him. He ripped off his headphones, the sudden silence in the studio almost as jarring as the scream itself. He stood up, pacing the soundproofed room. Just tired, Colton, he muttered to himself, rubbing his temples, overanalyzing every frequency. He walked to the thermostat, checking the temperature. It was set at a comfortable 70 degrees, but a strange, inexplicable coldness had begun to emanate from the speakers, or perhaps from the tape itself, chilling the air in his usually warm studio. It wasn't a draft. It was a pervasive, unnatural cold that seemed to settle in his bones. He shivered, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. This was beyond tape degradation. This was something else. He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but his mind kept returning to the scream, to the chilling cold, to the unsettling feeling that had taken root in his gut. Point 5. Paranoia and medical scrutiny. Next day, 9 a.m. The sounds didn't stay confined to the studio. They bled into his home life, seeping into the quiet corners of his apartment in the Queen and neighborhood. He'd be making coffee in his kitchen, and a faint whisper would brush past his ear, making him whirl around, only to find the room empty. He'd be reading in his living room, and a distant cry would echo from the empty hallway, making him check the locks, look over his shoulder. The inexplicable coldness followed him too, settling in random spots in his apartment, making him pull his sweater tighter even when the heat was on full blast. The paranoia mounted with each passing hour. He started losing sleep, his mind replaying the whispers and screams, trying to decipher them. Was he hallucinating? Was he suffering from auditory fatigue? A professional hazard manifesting in a terrifying way? The thought of a mental breakdown terrified him more than the sounds themselves. He couldn't trust his own ears, his most valuable asset. At 9 a.m. the next day, unable to bear the uncertainty, he scheduled an urgent appointment at Swedish Medical Center, a sprawling, modern facility on First Hill. He explained his symptoms to a sympathetic but skeptical doctor, downplaying the ghostly aspect and focusing on the auditory disturbances and the pervasive cold. He underwent a battery of tests that morning. First, an MRI of his brain, the claustrophobic hum of the machine a stark contrast to the phantom whispers in his head. Then, comprehensive hearing tests, audiometry to measure his hearing sensitivity across different frequencies, and tympanometry to check the function of his middle ear. Blood work was drawn, and a full neurological evaluation followed, probing his reflexes, balance, and cognitive function. Every single test came back normal. "You're in perfect health, Mr. Drew," the doctor assured him, a hint of concern in her eyes, as if she suspected he was withholding something, or perhaps that he was simply delusional. "Your hearing is exceptional, your brain scans are clear, and all your vitals are stable." Colton left the hospital more disturbed than ever. If his body and mind were fine, then what was happening? The lack of a medical explanation only amplified the chilling reality. The sounds were real, and they were not a product of his own failing faculties. They were external, intrusive, and terrifyingly persistent. The studio visit, a chilling reality, late morning, 11 a.m. The whispers and the unnerving coldness became his constant companions. They were louder now, more insistent, no longer just background noise, but a desperate plea. Unable to shake the feeling that the abandoned studio held the key, Colton decided he had to visit it. He scoured old band archives, cross-referencing the band name on the tape with historical venue lists, until he found it. 1420 South Industrial Way, Georgetown. An old industrial building, long abandoned, swallowed by the urban sprawl. He drove there the next morning, the Seattle drizzle a fitting backdrop to his grim pilgrimage. The address led him to a crumbling shell of a building, its brick facade scarred with graffiti, windows boarded up, a chain-link fence barely holding back the encroaching weeds. It smelled of damp earth, decay, and something else, something acrid and metallic, like old smoke. He found a loose board at the back and slipped inside. The moment he stepped over the threshold, the coldness he'd felt in his studio and apartment intensified, a palpable presence that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced through cracks in the boarded windows, illuminating a scene of forgotten instruments, overturned chairs, and the ghostly outlines of what must have been a recording booth that he walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. He could almost feel the echoes of the band, their youthful energy, their forgotten dreams. But beneath that, a profound sense of despair permeated the air. He walked to where the recording console would have been, a raised platform now covered in debris. He pulled out his phone, its flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and began recording the ambient sound, hoping to capture something, anything tangible that would prove he wasn't losing his mind. He stood there for a long time, listening, feeling the oppressive cold, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He heard nothing new, but the silence itself felt heavy, pregnant with untold stories. Point two, unveiling the tragic truth. Evening, 6 p.m., back in his studio, the ambient recording from the abandoned building yielded nothing but the sounds of creaking wood and distant traffic. Yet, the visit had solidified a terrifying conviction. The sounds weren't in his head, they were tied to that place. Inspired by the whispers and the chilling atmosphere, Colton dove into local historical archives, old newspaper clippings, and online forums. He searched for any incidents related to 1420 South Industrial Way, specifically 2 decades ago, the approximate age of the tape. He spent hours sifting through digital archives of the Seattle Times, microfiches from the Seattle Public Library, and obscure local history blogs. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a man possessed. He was looking for a needle in a haystack of forgotten tragedy. Then he found it. A small, almost forgotten article from the Seattle Times, dated October 17th, 2005. The headline, almost buried on an inside page, read, "Tragic fire claims life of young researcher in Georgetown studio." His heart pounded, a frantic drum against his ribs. The victim, Eleanor Vance, 28, a budding historian who was reportedly researching the building's industrial past. The fire, the article stated, was ruled accidental, caused by faulty wiring, accidental. The word echoed hollowly in Colton's mind, clashing violently with the screams he'd heard on the tape. The screams of terror, not of a sudden, accidental blaze. He felt a cold dread settle over him. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a cry for justice. The article mentioned her distraught boyfriend, Arthur Finch. Colton's mind raced. If Eleanor was killed, and the fire was ruled accidental, why the screams? Why the whispers? And why was her spirit reaching out through a forgotten tape? He cross-referenced names, old phone books, public records. It was painstaking work, but his obsession fueled him. He found an address for Arthur Finch, now an elderly man, in a quiet residential street in West Seattle, near Alki Beach. The address was a stark contrast to the derelict studio, a quiet, unassuming house that held a dark secret. Point 3. The first confrontation, next day, afternoon, 3 p.m. The next day, armed with a printout of the Seattle Times article and a fresh, high-quality copy of the digitized tape, Colton drove to Arthur Finch's modest house. The sky was overcast, a typical Seattle gray, mirroring the unease in his stomach. He knocked on the weathered front door. After a long moment, the door creaked open. A frail, gaunt man with a shock of thinning white hair and haunted, deeply set eyes peered out. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each one seemingly etched by sorrow. "Mr. Finch," Colton began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "My name is Colton Drew. I'm a sound engineer. I've been working on a tape recorded in the old Georgetown studio, and I found something about Eleanor Vance." Arthur's eyes, already wary, narrowed to slits. A flicker of something dark, fear, anger, recognition, crossed his face, quickly masked by a practiced blankness. "Eleanor? What about her?" His voice was a raspy whisper, like dry leaves rustling. "That was a long time ago. A tragic accident." He made a move to close the door, his hand already on the knob. His demeanor had shifted instantly, from cautious curiosity to immediate suspicion, almost hostility. Colton pressed on, knowing this might be his only chance. "The tape. I hear things on it. Whispers. Screams. Things that sound like her final moments, Mr. Finch. It doesn't sound like an accident." Arthur froze, his hand still on the doorknob, his body rigid. His eyes, now wide with a mixture of terror and fury, fixed on Colton. "You're crazy," he hissed, his voice gaining a sudden, surprising strength. "Get off my property. Now, or I'll call the police." He slammed the door shut with a resounding thud that echoed in the quiet street. Colton stood there for a long moment, the scent of damp earth and old secrets clinging to the air. The encounter had been brief, but Arthur Finch's reaction spoke volumes. The fear in his eyes, the immediate hostility, the mention of the police. It wasn't the reaction of a grieving man remembering a tragic accident. It was the reaction of a man with something to hide. Colton knew, with chilling certainty, that he was on the right track. A message from beyond. That night, 1 a.m. That night, Colton's sleep was not peaceful. The encounter with Arthur Finch had left him rattled, but also strangely energized. He lay in bed, the whispers and cries of Eleanor Vance now a constant presence in his mind. No longer just sounds, but a narrative unfolding. He drifted into a restless sleep, and the dream began. He was back in the abandoned studio, but it was not derelict. It was vibrant, alive with the energy of the band, the hum of equipment, the faint scent of stale beer and sweat. Then the air grew thick, acrid. Smoke began to billow from the corners, quickly engulfing the space. Flames licked at the walls, consuming everything in their path. Chaos erupted. He heard the band members screaming, scrambling for the exit, their cries muffled by the roar of the fire. Amidst the inferno, a figure emerged from the smoke, impossibly calm, impossibly clear. It was Eleanor Vance, her face etched with profound sorrow, her eyes, wide and luminous, fixed on him. She wasn't screaming. She was looking at him with an intensity that pierced his very soul. Her lips moved, and her voice, clear as a bell, resonated directly in his mind, bypassing his ears, a pure thought form. The tape, Colton. Give him a tape. He needs to hear it. He needs to know. Her gaze held him, a silent plea, a desperate instruction. The heat of the fire intensified, the smoke choked him, but he couldn't look away from her eyes, from the profound sorrow and the unyielding determination in them. The dream faded, replaced by the chilling silence of his bedroom. Colton woke in a cold sweat, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. The message seared in his brain, clearer than any sound he had ever processed. Give him the tape. He needs to hear it. He needs to know. It was no longer just a haunting. It was a mission. Eleanor Vance, from beyond the grave, was asking him to deliver her truth. The dream had left Colton with an unshakable resolve. He knew what he had to do. With steady hands, he made another copy of the digitized tape, labeling it simply, for Arthur. He didn't bother with a note. Eleanor's message was clear enough. He drove back to Arthur Finch's house, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows on the quiet residential street. He knocked on the weathered front door, the sound echoing ominously in the sudden silence that seemed to fall over the neighborhood. This time, Arthur opened the door almost immediately, his face contorted with anger, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury. "I told you, get lost," he snarled, his voice hoarse. "I'm calling the police. This is harassment." He reached for his phone, his hand trembling. Colton held out the tape, his arm extended, his voice calm, resolute, cutting through Arthur's rage. "Arthur, please. Eleanor asked me to deliver this to you. She wants you to hear it." The mention of Eleanor, spoken with such conviction, struck Arthur like a physical blow. His eyes, previously blazing with anger, widened, a flash of pure terror replacing the fury. His hand, still reaching for his phone, froze mid-air. He stared at the tape in Colton's hand, then at Colton's unwavering gaze, then back at the tape. A profound despair washed over his face, stripping away years, leaving him looking utterly broken. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Slowly, his hand trembling violently, Arthur reached out and snatched the tape from Colton's grasp. His fingers brushed Colton's, and Colton felt a jolt, a coldness that was not the supernatural chill he had grown accustomed to, but the icy touch of a man consumed by guilt. Arthur clutched the tape to his chest, his eyes glazed over, staring into nothingness. Without another word, he slammed the door shut, leaving Colton standing alone on the porch. Colton stood there for a long moment, the silence of the street pressing in around him. The coldness that had been his constant companion for days, weeks even, suddenly lifted. It was gone. The oppressive weight that had settled in his studio, his apartment, and even within his own mind, dissipated like smoke. He felt a lightness, a profound sense of peace. Eleanor's presence, it seemed, had moved on, her message delivered, her truth finally placed in the hands of the one who needed to hear it most. He turned and walked back to his car, the sunlight feeling warmer on his skin than it had in a long time. Point two. The silence and the shockwave. That night, 8 p.m., Colton returned home. That night, for the first time in weeks, his apartment was truly silent. No whispers, no distant cries, no chilling cold. The oppressive quiet was no longer a canvas for phantom sounds. It was simply silence, peaceful and profound. He ate a quiet dinner, read a book, and for the first time since he started working on the tape, he slept soundly, a deep, dreamless sleep that left him feeling utterly refreshed. He woke up the next morning feeling lighter, the weight of the haunting lifted, a sense of quiet accomplishment settling over him. He was happy, relieved, and a little awed by the strange journey he had just completed. He spent the next few days catching up on neglected work, his focus sharper than ever, his ears once again attuned only to the intricacies of music. The experience had changed him, but he wasn't sure how yet. He just knew he was free. Later that week, on a quiet Friday morning, while having breakfast in his kitchen, he scrolled through the local news on his tablet. He was sipping his coffee, a sense of calm contentment filling him. Then a headline caught his eye. A photo of Arthur Finch, gaunt and haunted, stared back at him from the screen. The headline read, "Arthur Finch, 62, found deceased in West Seattle home. Suicide note confesses to 1980 arson and murder of Eleanor Vance." The coffee cup slipped from Colton's hand, shattering on the polished concrete floor, the dark liquid spreading like a stain. The sound was deafening in the sudden, absolute silence of his apartment. He stared at the screen, his breath caught in his throat. The article detailed Arthur Finch's suicide and the chilling contents of his note, a full confession to setting the fire that killed Eleanor Vance 2 decades ago, not accidentally, but deliberately, to cover up an argument, a moment of rage, a crime he had lived with for 20 years. The note explicitly mentioned a tape, a ghostly recording that had forced his hand, bringing the truth to light. Colton sank into a chair, the full, chilling reality of what he had done, what he had helped uncover, settling over him like a shroud. The tape didn't just capture music. It captured a truth, a desperate plea for justice from beyond the grave. And Colton Drew, the meticulous sound engineer, the sonic alchemist, had been the unwilling, yet ultimately vital, messenger. The silence in his apartment was no longer peaceful. It was deafening, filled with the echoes of a past finally laid bare, a justice served by a ghost, and a man forever changed by the sounds he heard. He had brought peace to Eleanor Vance, but at what cost to himself? The question hung in the air, a new, unsettling resonance in the once quiet chambers of his mind.